Paul Blomfield. Paul, thanks for coming in to join us today.
Glad to be here.
We'll start with something that's particularly prevalent at the moment for Sheffield Central, which is the registering for vote. Currently, 65% of the student body here at Sheffield have registered to vote in the upcoming election. Do you think that the upcoming, the particular number of students preparing to vote might affect your position, particularly in the recent swing in popularity towards the Green Party?
Well, firstly, let me congratulate Sheffield University for the work they've done on student registration. When I sat down with the Vice Chancellor about 2 years ago now and said, let's see if we can explore a way of integrating electoral registration with student enrolment. He sees the opportunity, and what that means is we've now got a system in place in Sheffield which is leading the way nationally, and I think we should be very pleased about that. Students are clearly very important to me. I have more students in my constituency than any other Member of Parliament in the country, by far, 36,000. And certainly last time they were very influential in the election because they voted in large numbers for Nick Clegg's Liberal Democrats on the basis of the pledge that was made to abolish tuition fees. Now clearly that's going to be different this time. The polling that we've done suggests that students are moving very much in line with the general population. A bit more support for Labour, some more support for the Greens, but the important thing is that they are engaged in the electoral process, because one of the disappointing things from the last election is younger people in general were less likely to vote.
Absolutely, but in Sheffield, and in students in particular, there seems to be a particularly strong prevalence towards the Green Party, and it's stronger clearly than it was in 2010 in Sheffield. Is that something that you are preparing to deal with when it comes to your campaign?
Well, our polling suggests, and some polling that I saw recently from an organisation called Youth Insight suggests, that there are as many students likely to vote for the Conservatives as there are for the Greens. So I don't think that you can kind of polarise the election in that way. I think that students tend to be kind of at the cutting edge of trends. They do show stronger hostility, I'm glad to say, to political parties like UKIP. But overall I think that they will recognise that this election is a battle not between Labour and the Greens, but between Labour and the Conservatives, because whatever the outcome and however messy it is, there is only one certainty, that the next government is going to be led either by Labour or by the Tories.
And what can you mentioned how the student body will vote differently this time. What can a pretty dissatisfied with politics student body hope to gain by voting Labour this time?
Well, I think that firstly, taking up your dissatisfaction with politics, I think that Nick Clegg did a disservice not only to the Liberal Democrats, but actually to all of us involved in politics by his pledge last time. That, trust me, we're different. What we say is what we mean is what we say. We will fight, we will oppose, we will vote against any increase in tuition fees, and we'll abolish them within the lifetime of the next Parliament. And that's obviously put the Liberal Democrats in some contempt from a lot of young people, but it disturbs me that a lot of young people on the doorstep are therefore rejecting politics as a whole. And I think that the message I want to get across, and I hope that people will appreciate, is that politics makes a difference in their lives. We've seen that over the last 5 years. We've seen how we've become a more unequal society. We've seen how millionaires have had tax cuts, and the poorest have been clobbered with the obscenity of the bedroom tax, for example. So I hope that students will look at the wider political agenda and say, as the churches have said recently, we need a more equal society, we need a fairer society, we need a stronger society, and that's not going to be delivered by the Conservatives. That can only be delivered by a Labour government. Specifically, we also need a growing economy to create graduate level jobs and careers that people can look forward to. And we haven't got that under this government. And Labour will offer that by investing in people and investing in infrastructure and re-establishing growth.
Yes, you mentioned the apprenticeships. Obviously, on Monday, Ed Miliband announced that he'd back apprenticeships for all school leavers to get required grades by 2020. But where will these apprenticeships be? Because there's a cynicism that jobs are created most jobs created in the southeast and Sheffield and the north in general is rather left out in that regard. Will Sheffield miss out again? And can you give any guarantees that these apprenticeship jobs will come to Sheffield? Will be more accessible to those that perhaps can't travel all the way down to London to take up a job?
Well, I think it's a really important point. I mean, I've spoken in Parliament about the way in which our economy is imbalanced in so many ways. Mentioned a moment ago the inequality between rich and poor, but the unequal distribution of power and wealth between north and south. The huge number of private sector jobs that have been grown in London, whereas jobs have been lost within Sheffield. Politics can change that. So, for example, I argued in Parliament that we should be moving government departments out of London, because not only would that stimulate the local economy, and it's something that we did in the past when we were in power, move sections of the Home Office, the DWP, other government departments out of London. It creates spin-off jobs by having that happening in our great cities around the country. But also it's important because we need those people who are making decisions, not only politicians but civil servants, to see our problems through the prism of their personal experience of living outside of London. Too many people make decisions for this country based on their experience of being Londoners, of bringing their families up in London, of having their jobs in London. We've got to change that. The other thing that Labour will do is, and I'm going to say this not simply as a local MP, but as somebody who's the Parliamentary Private Secretary to Hilary Benn, our Shadow Secretary of State for Local Government, is we will drive power and decision making down to local areas through councils and councils coming together in city regions like Sheffield, and that transforms the environment.
And how will this affect students in that, through your involvement in the Students' Union, that students feel a need to get integrated into the local community? And how will this will this help them become more integrated in the Sheffield community? And I mean, how will you help that happen?
Well, I think devolving power down to communities, moving wealth out of London, redistributing economic activity around the country, will enable students who I talk to, who say they want to stay on in Sheffield, but they want the sort of jobs in Sheffield that will enable them to do so, to make that decision. I mean, traditionally we had the highest graduate retention rate in the country. More students wanted to stay on in Sheffield than in any other city where they went to university. But we've got to have the jobs to do that. And our plans for redistributing power and wealth across the country will enable them to do it. But it also means that we've got to see universities as part of the powerhouse of the local economy, and that's something I've argued very strongly in Parliament, and I've cited the sort of things that Sheffield University are doing. And the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre out at Waverley is a model of how we can bring together kind of traditional manufacturing skills with cutting edge research and academic activity from the university in creating high value jobs in a high value manufacturing sector. And that's led to Rolls-Royce and Boeing and others bringing investment into the city. So there are real opportunities if government gets involved in active industrial strategy, as opposed to the current government, which is just kind of laissez-faire, let the market rip.
But just to bring back to the point you made before, that it's going to be either a Labour government or a Tory-controlled government, there is, however, still a great still likely that there will be another coalition government, whether it involves Labour or the Tories. If Labour were involved in a coalition, there would be policies that they would have to forego. As far as you're concerned, what is a policy that you think that in the interest of politics and in the interest of the people who voted for Labour, that you could let go, and conversely, what is a policy that Labour should not let go, even if it enters the coalition under any circumstances?
Well, it's really difficult to anticipate the outcome of the election and what the kind of electoral arithmetic might be. I mean, and what partnerships that might be leading to. I mean, I think that if you look back at the last coalition, I mean, Nick Clegg made a huge mistake from his party's point of view by not really learning from coalition politics in Europe, because what he did was strike a poor deal in which basically the identity of the Liberal Democrats was subsumed within the Conservatives, and he'll pay the price for that in many seats across the country. I think coalition politics is about political parties maintaining their own identity and bargaining within power, as well as in pulling together immediate post-election agreements. From our point of view in the Labour Party, from my point of view as a Labour MP, I got involved in politics because of a passionate belief in social justice, in challenging inequality, in a belief in community cohesion and in different communities coming together and working together, that we're stronger working together. Those are the sort of values that we can't compromise.
But there must be something that you believe, that a policy that you particularly believe in the Labour Party, which should a coalition occur, you wouldn't want to see your party give up under any circumstance. Wouldn't want to see as much as compromise. There must be certain values that you and policies that you see in the Labour Party that mustn't be.
Well, of course. I mean, our commitment to the NHS. I mean, that couldn't be compromised. Our commitment to tackling inequality, that couldn't be compromised. Our commitment to intervening in the labour market to stop the abuse of 0 hours contracts, of employers who are refusing to comply with legal legislation to pay the minimum wage, tackling those sort of issues, we can't compromise on that, because that's at the very heart of what we believe.
You mentioned your background, the lack of trust that the country has in politics. Do you think that this country has a problem with career politicians, those who have only worked in politics rather than in the community, and therefore perhaps have less of an understanding?
There's a lot of popular narrative about politics and politicians that is perhaps worth questioning, because you're right. I mean, I hear a lot on the doorstep people say, we don't like career politicians. There are an awful lot of people like me who spent most of their lives living and working in their communities before they were elected. Equally, if you look back in the past, you look at people like Winston Churchill, whose death we commemorated recently, who many people would regard as one of the kind of commanding politicians and popular politicians of the 20th century. He was a career politician. So was Harold Wilson. So, there's always been this balance between people who have started early in politics and others who've lived a wider life, got a wider hinterland before they've entered kind of full-time politics.
And do you think that life outside politics allows you to become a better politician? Do you think?
I think it enables you to bring different things. That wider experience, for me, kind of strengthens what I can do. But I look at others who I work alongside who've entered straight into politics at an early age, and they bring something else and are good colleagues. We need a mix.
Yeah. One obvious issue which we haven't touched on yet regarding students is the tuition fees and higher education payment debate. You've mentioned actually off camera that Labour haven't finalised their policies in this regard, but what would you do in order to push the interests of students when it comes to higher education payments? Well,
I've argued for a very long time that we need to move away from the current system. I opposed the trebling of tuition fees, just as I opposed the top-up fees back in 2004. I think we now see a system which is in crisis. I've pressed David Willets when he was Universities Minister on this a number of times, and he was finally forced to admit that they got their sums wrong. So we've created a system, without going into all the kind of technical details, which is not only loading huge debt onto students, but is actually costing the public purse more than the system it replaced. it's a system in crisis. It's not sustainable, and we need to have a pretty radical look at it. My view, which I've argued since 2003 and before that, is that we've got to accept within mass higher education that there should be a student contribution alongside a contribution from society and alongside a contribution from business. But it's got to be done more fairly. I would look to a system which took away the burden of debt that's associated with fees, but required a graduate contribution through the tax system based on the benefits that people get out of their university education rather than what they have to borrow to get there in the first place. So if you do go into a big job in the city, you pay back a bit more than if you go into a low-paid job in journalism, starting off as on a local newspaper. Seems to me that's a fairer way of doing it, and it also takes away the fear of debt.
Wouldn't this perhaps risk discouraging some students from entering into degrees which perhaps lead to higher paid graduate jobs? So perhaps would it perhaps risk discouraging students interested in entering engineering or economics?
Well, the higher paid jobs, frankly, are as we've seen, many of them are in the city, and many of those recruit from PPEs in Oxford. I don't think it's going to be discouraging Oxford PPEs. Now that's a kind of crude characterisation of it.
What about Sheffield students who want to come to Sheffield to study economics or study engineering? Wouldn't that discourage those students?
Well, I don't know. You ask yourself the question. At the point in which you're deciding your career, are you going to be more put off by coming out of university with a £50,000 debt, or more put off by knowing that for a period of 25 to 30 years, and that's the sort of modelling that's been done by economists on the issue, I'm going to be paying an extra 2% income tax? I don't think it's a disincentive. I think it will take away the fear of debt, but we've also got to look at some of the wider issues. In particular, how students need support for maintenance as well while they're undergraduates, and also, and I've been pushing this for a long time, the government have made some limited changes, how we support students going on to take postgraduate taught courses, because for many people that's a significant differentiator in the jobs market. The government have put something in place, but I think it's inadequate, particularly because it requires repayment of the limited number of loans they're going to be making available concurrently with undergraduate loans, and I think that puts an unreasonable pressure on people.
Yes, as a postgraduate student, one of the things that I think puts me off and put quite a few people off is the lack of funding opportunities available for postgraduate study, which is crucial in higher education. Where do you stand on that issue in terms of possibility of postgraduate funding in the future?
Well, I've argued way back from early in this Parliament, from the introduction of the new system, that we need to integrate postgraduate taught funding, support for postgraduate taught students, into our student support system, that there needs to be assistance available to enable people to take on postgraduate taught courses. And if not, it's not only frustrating for people like you who have taken that route, but it will exclude people who can't afford, or can't with their parents' help afford, to take on a master's course. And what we'll then have is, whereas once an undergraduate degree was kind of a key, not having a degree was a key barrier to social mobility, we'll create a new barrier to social mobility, which will be not having a postgraduate qualification.
Just got a couple of, just to finish off, last night the Green Party, the leader Natalie Bennett was speaking here at the Union, and when asked about your record as MP, she said that described you as a nice guy, but with your eyes on a ministerial position, and so someone who never votes against party lines. That's a slight that's the gist of what she said. I mean, what would your reaction What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's unfortunate if she's kind of personalising politics in that way. I think that if my focus had been on wanting a ministerial position, I'd be having a shadow ministerial position now. My focus has been on being a constituency MP, and I've led in Parliament on a whole range of issues which aren't necessarily popular, and don't necessarily win a huge number of votes. I think that's unfortunate to kind of get involved in that sort of tacky politics.
To finish off, you've been an MP. You've been the MP for Sheffield Central for some time, and obviously, as you say, has the highest student population of any constituency in the UK. What do you think that you should have done for students of Sheffield so far in your time as MP that perhaps you haven't done yet?
Well, I mean, I kind of inevitably focus on what I have done. I'm the first MP who's set up regular student advice surgeries, which I've done termly on both campuses over the last 5 years. Regular Q&A sessions with students in both places, regular liaison with the student union elected leaderships in both places. I've set up an all-party group providing student voice, in which I've worked with NUS. I've led on student loans issues. I'm the secretary of the all-party university group, and I've championed the concerns that the student union has and the universities have around international student issues. Every issue that has been raised with me by students, I've taken to Parliament.
So you feel that you've done everything that you can do for Sheffield students, everything that you could have done in the last 5 years for students you think you've done?
I've certainly done my best.
And looking forward to the next 5 years, if you were to get in for another 5 years, what would be the first thing that you would do to raise the interest of students in Parliament?
To increase the interest of students in Parliament? I think that it very much depends on who forms the government. I think if Labour form the government, we can demonstrate the power of politics to students, because we can change things that matter. We can change the funding system. We can tackle the barriers that have been put in place by the current government to international students. And so I think that the real test, the real way of people seeing the importance of politics is politics demonstrating it works for them, and under a Labour government it can.
Paul Blomfield, thanks very much for coming in.
It's been good to talk to you.